Hey friends, a lot of people have been asking me to talk about meal prepping. And while I was talking with my family earlier this week, I realized that while this is something that comes easily to me now, after almost 5 years of nutritional science and culinary arts training, there's actually a lot of planning that goes into a successful meal prep. So I've decided to film a 5-part series in which I'll share with you guys every single tip I have to make meal prepping as enjoyable, simple, and satisfying as it can be for you. In this series, we'll cover meal prepping basics, meal prepping on a budget, meal prepping when you don't have time or just don't want to cook, and finally, I'll walk you guys through the whole process from when I first start thinking about what foods I want to eat to when I have my finished, cooked, packaged meals. Let's get into it. Hello friends, welcome to Nutrition with Celeste. My name's Celeste and on this channel I share information about practical nutrition, accessible cooking, and yummy food. While I have formal training in both nutritional sciences and culinary arts, I am not yet a registered dietitian, nor do I claim to know more than a licensed dietitian or medical doctor. Everything I say here is purely for educational purposes, and you should always consult with a medical professional before making any changes to your eating or supplement routine. Okay, so part 1, fundamentals. This video is going to serve as a basic introduction to the world of meal prepping and also serve as a foundation to all of the videos to come in this series. First things first, I just want to define meal prepping. And basically, meal prepping is creating all components of a meal before you're going to be eating it. So sometimes we might cook a meal right before we eat it and have no leftovers. But with meal prepping, we cook a lot of food usually at one time and then don't have to cook for several days because we can pull from the food that we made during that one bulk meal prep. People meal prep for a variety of reasons. They might do so to save time, to save money, in order to meet their personal nutrition or health needs, but there are so many different reasons why people do this. This actually brings me to my first fundamental tip, which is 1, to determine your priorities. So your personal priorities are going to help shape every meal planning and prepping decision that you make. I'm going to insert a graphic of the consumer food choice model, which identifies 6 major factors driving food choice: cost, taste, variety, well-being, self-expression, and convenience. Now this list is certainly not exhaustive, and you might have other factors that impact the food choices that you make. Personally, variety and well-being are the factors that are most important to me. So I know that I get really bored when I have to eat the same food again and again, so variety is really important to me when I'm planning my meals. Another thing is well-being. So I have a stomach condition, and I can get really sick if I eat foods that contain dairy or if I don't get enough fiber during the week. So when I'm planning my meals, I make sure that I make everything dairy-free and that I have enough fiber to keep myself feeling good. But that's just me, and you might have completely different priorities. Figuring out what matters to you will help you design a meal plan and meal prep program that best satisfies your personal needs. The second fundamental step is to plan out your meals for the week or for whatever time period you want to prep. I'm going to show you how I do this on my computer. So as you can see, I've written down a couple different meals on the side. So I usually eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I usually have at least one snack during the day. And you'll see I also include a dessert because I have a huge sweet tooth and have to make sure that I have something on hand that's sweet. Now I'm going to start writing in the different meals that I'm going to have for the week. So I like to have veggie eggs with toast, oatmeal, toast and peanut butter, and a couple different sides at breakfast. This week I'm also going to do a braised fish with chimichurri sauce and coconut rice, a beef stew, and then I'm going to use the leftover chimichurri to make chicken. We've got some black beans and brown rice with that, and then on the side I'm just going to make blistered tomato salad, grilled veggies, and then just a regular salad with like greens. For snacks in my family we like to eat fruit. We also like to have something crispy or crunchy on hand, as well as different protein options. And then for dessert, I'm going to make coffee cake this week because Mother's Day is coming up. And then in miscellaneous here, I'm just going to make sure I write down any beverages that I need to buy and also refills of different food items I might be running low on. The next thing I'm going to do is write down initials next to certain meals. So in my house, everybody doesn't eat the same thing. So for veggie eggs, there's only 2 of us who will eat that, whereas all 3 of us are going to enjoy sides like fruit. So I'm going to go through everything and just write in who is going to eat certain stuff. And labeling foods like this is going to make it a lot easier for you when you're determining quantity later on. The next step is to write down ingredients for each different menu item. So for the veggie eggs, I know that I need whole eggs and egg whites. and then I want to have different vegetables. So I like to do onion always, and then I'll switch between bell peppers and mushrooms. I'm just going to go through, continuing to write all of the ingredients. And even if something repeats, you still want to write it in. That way you know, if you need to buy a lot of something, like let's say 4 different recipes called for bell peppers, when you decide on quantity later on, you're going to know that you need a higher amount. I'm really excited about this blistered tomato salad. So I like roast the cherry tomatoes with balsamic vinegar, honey, and olive oil on really high until they kind of crack open. And then once they cool down, I toss them with some freshly chopped basil and feta cheese and oregano. It's like so good. You'll see sometimes I'm writing in /whatever. That's when it doesn't really matter to me. So for my salad option here, I am happy eating kale, eating lettuce, eating whatever kind of salad green, and that just gives me a little bit more flexibility when I get to the grocery store. You'll also see that I'm doing the same with fruit, so I don't really mind what fruit I'm snacking on. I'm happy to eat apples, oranges, grapes, pears, anything, so it really doesn't matter. Okay, so now we're going to move over to the grocery list, and you'll see that I've broken it down into a couple different categories. You'll see all of them when I scooch over in a second, but I've got produce, meat, dairy, dry goods, frozen things, as well as miscellaneous. So I'm going to start looking at my ingredients list in this column and then just transfer things over. And I'm going to put them into these different categories because that'll just make it easier for me when I do get to the grocery store to buy everything that's in that one particular section of the store at one time instead of having to go back and forth a bunch of different places. And something else is I know that I already have onions at home. So you'll see that I put it in red. But basically that means that I don't need to add it to my list, and I'm just going to put it in red so that I remember that I have that already. So I'm pretty set for oatmeal this week. I didn't need a lot of those different ingredients, but I do need a lot of ingredients for this chimichurri fish that I'm going to be making. So writing a lot of those in. Now we're on to the beef stew. Like I said, I already have onions, so I don't need to add those. We've got potatoes, some herbs, and flour as well. So I'm just continuing to add things in. So again, I wrote here, you'll see the whatever thing that I say to myself, and again, that's just to communicate to myself that when I get to the store, if I see something else that I'd like to use for roasted vegetable or something else I want to use for salad greens, that's totally fine. So oftentimes when I write this to myself, I'll see asparagus or I'll see cauliflower, and I'll just go for that instead. So the last part of this is that we're going to go through and write quantities next to everything. And so this is going to be influenced by the first thing that we wrote in, which is who is going to be eating the different foods. And then the second part, which I said, which is like if something is being used in a bunch of different recipes. So for this one, I know I need a few bell peppers because I'm having them most of us will be having them for breakfast every morning. I need a lot of bananas because pretty much all of us eat a banana every single day. But then when you see down here, I only need one small piece of ginger because I'm only using it for like just to make that one dish, which is the coconut rice. Again, writing in quantities here. So the fish, the beef chuck, and the chicken breast is going to be pretty evenly split by everyone, so I want to make sure that I get enough. And writing down these quantities gets easier the more you do it too. So by now I know what a small container of feta looks like, and I know that that's how much I'll need. But if you're new to this, you might want to reference a recipe and it'll tell you the exact size or it'll tell you the exact quantity that you need. And you can write that down, and then when you get to the grocery store, just compare sizes. Okay, so that is the completed list. You can see I started very simply just with the meals that I wanted to have, wrote in the different ingredients, and then who would be eating them as well. And then I transferred the ingredients over to the grocery list and was sure not to include the things that I already have at home. The last fundamental tip to meal prepping is to make sure you take into account certain considerations. So the first of these is cost. Do you know that you need to shop on sale, shop at a discount store, or maybe you want to use recipes that utilize lower cost ingredients? The next video in this series is actually going to be all about meal prepping on a budget, so keep an eye out if this is something that's of importance to you. The second consideration is differing food needs. So if you're just meal prepping for yourself, this might not apply to you, but if you're cooking for a bunch of different people, you'll need to take into account their needs and wants. So for example, maybe you have somebody who doesn't like broccoli. Or maybe there's somebody with a certain allergy or food restriction. You'll want to take all of this into account when planning your meals. The fourth video in this series will be all about meal prepping for variety and special food needs, so be sure to check it out if this is something that applies to you. The third consideration is to determine food quantity. So when you're deciding how much you need to buy of a certain food product, you'll need to think about who's going to be eating it, what serving sizes different people eat, because we all know that a toddler and an 18-year-old certainly won't eat the same amount of food. And you'll also want to think about how many days a certain food will be eaten. If you only want 2 days worth of pasta, you'll need to buy a whole lot less than if you want 10 days worth of pasta. The next consideration is shelf life. So if you know you can only go shopping on Sundays and can only cook on Thursdays, you might not want to buy something like fresh fish that can go bad before you have the time to cook it. You'll also want to factor in how often you'd like to go to the grocery store. So if you're someone who can or wants to go to the grocery store every few days, shelf life might not be so important to you. But if you're someone who can only get there every couple of weeks, you might want to steer more towards products that have a longer shelf life. The next considerations are when to shop and when to cook. So this will be completely based on your own schedule. When do you have the time to get to the grocery store? When do you have the time to cook? The third video in this series is going to be all about meal prepping when you don't feel like you have time to cook. So again, keep an eye out if that's something that might interest you. Our last consideration is storage. So you don't want to spend all this time grocery shopping and all this time cooking only to come home and realize that you have nowhere to store all the food that you made. You'll want to think about where you're storing the food. Are you putting it in the fridge or freezer? You'll also want to think about size of the container. Do you want a bunch of smaller, individually packaged meals, or do you want more of a family-style serving option? You'll want to think about how you're heating up the food. So, do you want containers that can stand to be put in the oven, or do you want something that's microwave safe? Or maybe you don't need something that's going to be heated up at all if it's like a cold salad or something like that. Finally, consider the amount of space that you have. It'll be really difficult to store 2 weeks of fully cooked meals if you're working with a mini fridge. Just be realistic with yourself. All right, friends, those are my fundamentals of meal prepping. Determining your priorities, planning out meals, writing a grocery list, and remembering certain special considerations. Check in next week for part 2 of this series, Meal Prepping on a Budget. I hope to see you then.